to the Australian Embassy for the initiative and productive cooperation to make this event happen. And our warmest gratitude to His Excellency Mr. Will Nankervis for your invaluable contribution for this lecture. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, since becoming ASEAN first dialogue partners in 1974, Australia has supported ASEAN vision of a rule-based, inclusive and economically integrated regional community. In 2013, the Australian mission to ASEAN was established in Jakarta and is responsible for advancing Australia's interests with ASEAN and ASEAN processes. In 2014, Australia and ASEAN formally became strategic partners, recognizing the importance of a relationship building mutual security and prosperity. Australia and ASEAN have an agreed plan of action covering the breadth of cooperation, which is updated every 5 years. At the historic first annual ASEAN-Australia Leaders Summit in October 2021, ASEAN leaders agreed to establish a comprehensive strategic partnership between ASEAN and Australia. ASEAN is Australia's second largest trading partner as a bloc and is essential to Australia's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2019 and 2020, Australia's trade with ASEAN countries was 113.7 billion, which is greater than its two-way trade with Japan and the United States. When it comes to regional security, the Indo-Pacific strategies and Quad, in which Australia has played an active role, and especially AUKUS announcement by the leaders of Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America, including the Australia decision to acquire nuclear power submarines, have been cautious discussion within ASEAN. However, ASEAN welcomes Australia's continued support and reaffirmation for ASEAN centrality and commitment to promote regional peace, stability, and security in accordance with the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, as well as steadfast commitment to meet all its obligations as a nation, as a non-nuclear weapon state under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In this connection and context, it is important for us to get better understanding and discuss about a number of issues related to the development of ASEAN-Australia partnership, the importance of Southeast Asia, and ASEAN to Australia perspective on ASEAN crucial role in shaping the regional order. Australia stepped up cooperation with ASEAN and historic agreement in October 2021 to establish ASEAN-Australia comprehensive strategic partnership, as well as the future direction of ASEAN-Australia relationship. So, the topic of our distinguished lecture this morning on ASEAN-Australia comprehensive strategic partner is timely for us to deliberate and reflect on retrospects and prospects of ASEAN-Australia relationship which respond to the above mentioned issues. We are indeed honored today to have Ambassador Will Nankervis as our most distinguished guest speakers. Ambassador Nankervis is ambassador of Australian mission to ASEAN in Jakarta. Previously, he was an Assistant Secretary of the Indo-Pacific Strategy Regional Maritime Branch in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, where his responsibility included implementation of Australia Indo-Pacific Strategy as well as regional maritime security issues. Ambassador Nankervis was a member of the task force that developed Australia 2017 foreign policy white paper. Prior to that, he headed the DFAT, Iraq, and Syria task force. He was a political counselor in Australia's permanent mission to the United Nations in New York during Australia's term on the UN Security Council. 2013 and 2014. A career default officer, Ambassador Nankervis, has also undertaken postings and short-term missions in Sri Lanka and Solomon's Islands. As organizers of this lecture, we strongly hope that all participants will gain better understanding of the overall aspect of ASEAN-Australia relationship, especially in-depth insight into possible implications of the new ASEAN-Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership within ASEAN region and beyond. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Excellency Ambassador Nankervis to deliver his lectures. Your Excellency, Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Excellency, for that. Maybe I don't need the.
Okay.
Maybe I don't need the platform. Tall enough already. Thank you very much, Excellency, for that introduction. Venerable monks, His Excellency Yang Peou, Secretary General of the Royal Academy of Cambodia, His Excellency Kin Phea, Director of International Relations of the International Relations Institute of the Royal Academy of Cambodia, my friend and colleague Pablo Kang, Australian Ambassador to Cambodia, and his excellent team from the Australian Embassy. Ladies and gentlemen, those who are here with us in the room and those who are online, really great to be here. Thank you so much. Great to be joining you today, and great to have the opportunity to explore some important issues with your excellencies and with the officials and members of the public making up the audience here today and online. It's been a long time since we've been able to travel and meet in person like this, and I think it's really significant and a testimony to the work that Cambodia has done and the work of the Cambodian government in addressing the COVID-19 situation, getting such a large proportion of its population vaccinated against COVID-19, that the conditions are right that I'm able to travel here, and I'm very grateful to Cambodia for that. This is I've been Australian Ambassador to ASEAN for one and a half years, but because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to travel in the region. So this is my first visit to the region outside of Jakarta as Australia's ambassador to ASEAN, and I'm so delighted that it has been to Cambodia, a beautiful country and an amazing city, and I have had really excellent discussions here, and it's perfect timing just as Cambodia adopts the role of chair, the very important role of chair of ASEAN. So perfect timing, and I think my visit comes at quite a pivotal time, obviously for Cambodia taking on the role of chair, for the wider Indo-Pacific region, and of course for ASEAN-Australia relations, which I think are at an all-time high. 2021 last year was a really big year for ASEAN-Australia cooperation. As His Excellency Kin Phea mentioned, it saw the successful historical first annual ASEAN-Australia Summit. Of course, we've had many summits, but we have now made the decision that those summits will happen annually. So the Australian Prime Minister will meet with his ASEAN counterparts every year, and we had the first of those regular annual meetings last year. Hopefully this year we will have the first one of those annual meetings that's physical here in Cambodia. So we have our fingers crossed that meeting can happen in person this year. And as mentioned, 2021 also saw the historic agreement to establish an ASEAN-Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, or CSP. And the decision was that we would establish a CSP that's meaningful, substantive, and mutually beneficial. Part of the reason for me being here this week is to hold discussions with the Cambodian government, with officials, with members of academia, about how we make sure that that comprehensive strategic partnership is substantial. I'm here to listen to the priorities of Cambodia and ASEAN Chair, to make sure that that comprehensive strategic partnership delivers substance to the benefit of ASEAN and in support of Cambodia's priorities as ASEAN Chair. As also mentioned, we have a long history of cooperation. Australia became ASEAN's first ever dialogue partner in 1974. So we have almost half a century of cooperation and engagement, and our relations have deepened and grown ever since then. But they really entered a new chapter in October last year with the decision to establish the CSP. For Australia, a CSP is an affirmation of our support for ASEAN and ASEAN's centrality in the Indo-Pacific. It's much more than a label. It's about delivering real substance. It provides a framework for deepening cooperation and will position our partnership for the future. So Australia's Foreign Minister Maurice Payne visited Cambodia in November last year to discuss Cambodia's agenda as ASEAN Chair and to listen to Cambodian priorities for the implementation of our CSP. As Australia's ambassador to ASEAN, I'm here in Phnom Penh this week for follow-up discussions alongside our bilateral ambassador, Pablo Kang. That's how Australia seeks to work with ASEAN, as a partner that listens and genuinely aligns our support with ASEAN's priorities. We want to consult really carefully as we take forward our CSP. So this week, we've been discussing in particular how we implement the new Australia for ASEAN package of initiatives in support of the CSP. We're also really keen to be working with Cambodia on its priorities under its theme for its ASEAN Chair year, ASEAN Act, Addressing Challenges Together. I've been listening to Cambodia's thoughts on how Australia can support ASEAN and Cambodia as Chair in fulfilling its goals. So in my remarks today, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I thought I would cover 4 things. The first, why Southeast Asia and ASEAN are important to Australia. Second, strategic dynamics in the region. Third, Australia's stepped up cooperation with ASEAN. And then fourth, I'll return to the ASEAN-Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, the theme for the lecture, and the future direction of ASEAN-Australia relations. I hope I'll leave you with the message that the ASEAN-Australia partnership is stronger than ever, and Australia is a reliable, capable partner focused on ASEAN priorities that will strongly support Cambodia as ASEAN Chair. So first, why is ASEAN important to Australia? So Southeast Asia is profoundly important to Australia, including strategically and economically. We're neighbours, of course, and we have deep connections between our communities and institutions and businesses. I think Australia has a particularly deep connection to Cambodia, not just through our people-to-people links, but through our historical support for Cambodia's peace process. ASEAN as a bloc has a population of 630 million people. And also as a bloc, ASEAN can be considered Australia's second largest trading partner, with two-way trade valued at more than $122 billion. That's more than 13% of Australia's total trade, so such a significant economic partner. We have really deep and long-standing people-to-people links, including, importantly, through educational exchange. Many Cambodians, so many of the Cambodians I've met while I've been here over the last few days have studied in Australia. And Australia is, by a long way, the most popular English language destination country for Cambodian university students overseas. And Australian alumni, those who graduate from Australian institutions, are making really important contributions to Cambodia in a variety of fields, including your Minister for Environment, Sai Sum Al, who obtained a PhD at Monash University, and Dr. Eng Netra, the head of the Cambodian Development Resource Institute, who also has a PhD, as it happens, from Monash University. Those are just 2 examples, but there are many, many more that I could mention. And Southeast Asia is a region that's critical to Australia's security. The Indo-Pacific, as was mentioned, is the way we frame our foreign policy. And when we think of the Indo-Pacific, the two great oceans of the Pacific and the Indian, ASEAN's right there. ASEAN's there geographically in the center of those two oceans. But it's also right there politically, right there strategically. And when Australia thinks about the Indo-Pacific, we think of ASEAN at the center. Our Prime Minister and Foreign Minister are very fond of saying that Australia sees ASEAN at the very heart, the very center, the very heart of the Indo-Pacific. So in that sense, ASEAN is at the heart of our regional strategy and our regional foreign policy and our most important foreign policy priorities. So as we look to navigate the post-pandemic era, or what we hope will be the post-pandemic era, Australia remains a really committed supporter of ASEAN centrality. ASEAN has underpinned peace and stability in the region since its establishment. A strong ASEAN benefits Australia and benefits the region in a whole range of ways, and I'll mention just three of those. First, rules and norms. ASEAN and its architecture, such as the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus, are the primary rule and norm setting body in the Indo-Pacific. This gives ASEAN great agency to shape the region. ASEAN leaders have demonstrated how this can work by adopting the Asean Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, setting out areas for cooperation and important principles like openness, transparency, inclusivity, a rules-based framework, and respect for international law. The Outlook provides a framework for engagement in the region. Australia believes that those principles outlined in the Outlook should guide the post-pandemic regional order, and we're working on concrete cooperation under the Outlook's four key areas: maritime, connectivity, the Sustainable Development Goals, and economic development. And I'll come back to that when we talk about our comprehensive strategic partnership. Second, convening power, the regional convener. ASEAN has unmatched convening power. The ASEAN Chair convenes the preeminent regional forum for leader-led discussion of strategic topics, the East Asia Summit, or EAS. So later this year, at the end of the year, in around November, the Prime Minister of Cambodia will be convening the EAS. We'll see, we hope, the President of the United States, leaders from China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, all converge here for discussion of strategic issues. And that's such an important strategic discussion that happens every year. And ASEAN's the convener of that discussion. ASEAN chairs that discussion, and it's ASEAN that brings those leaders together for the discussion in that preeminent forum of the really big issues that are facing the region. So despite the virtual setting of the last two East Asia summits, the EAS provided the opportunity to discuss the region's big topics: COVID-19, the crisis in Myanmar, vaccine access, the South China Sea, and the Korean Peninsula, to name just a few. Participants don't always agree on all points, but the EAS is a forum for ideas to be canvassed and perspectives heard. And ASEAN leads that forum and chairs that forum, and Cambodia will chair that forum this year. And third, ASEAN has cemented itself at the centre of the regional economic order through the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. I've just come from discussions at your Ministry of Commerce this morning in which we talked about implementation of RCEP. But I really congratulate ASEAN on the entry into force of RCEP for the first group of signatories on the 1st of January, which I'm really pleased to say includes both Cambodia and Australia. This will be the biggest regional trade deal ever signed, creating a single cohesive set of trade rules. At a time of rising barriers in other parts of the world, this sends a strong message that the Indo-Pacific is open for business. It will spur economic recovery in the wake of the pandemic. And importantly, it reinforces ASEAN's position at the heart of regional economic institutions and the regional economic architecture. ASEAN is really at the center of this important initiative. The second topic I wanted to discuss was strategic dynamics in the region, including the implications of COVID-19. So Southeast Asia is at the center of the big strategic shifts underway in the Indo-Pacific. It's a nexus of the strategic competition, and it will be central to the shape of the regional order. As was mentioned, I worked on Australia's 2017 Foreign Policy White Paper, and it outlined some of those shifts and challenges. More acute pressure on rules and norms, intensifying strategic competition, maritime disputes, freedom of navigation under challenge, cyber attacks growing in frequency and sophistication, and of course the impact of COVID-19 on economies, societies and governments has been profound. 2020 and 2021 taught us that we need to expect the unexpected. And of course, I can't speak about strategic dynamics in the region without mentioning the coup in Myanmar, with its significant implications for the people of Myanmar and for peace and stability in the region. Australia is really deeply concerned about the deteriorating situation in Myanmar and its implications for our region. We've consistently called on the Myanmar military to exercise restraint, engage in dialogue, release all those arbitrarily detained, including Australian Professor Sean Turnell, and facilitate immediate and unimpeded access for humanitarian assistance. Australia has announced a range of assistance for Myanmar in response to COVID-19 and the ongoing humanitarian situation. This includes technical assistance and $5 million to the ASEAN Centre for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management, or AHA Centre. We're working closely with the AHA Centre, and this is a very big part of my job at the moment, to identify how we can together provide life-saving assistance to people in need across Myanmar. Australia strongly supports ASEAN's leadership and leading role in responding to the crisis. And we continue to call on the Myanmar regime to implement ASEAN's 5-point consensus swiftly and completely. We're very concerned about the lack of progress in implementing the 5-point consensus and think it's incumbent on the regime to allow full and timely implementation. The situation in Myanmar is extraordinarily challenging, but Australia is committed to working closely with Cambodia as the 2022 ASEAN Chair, along with our other ASEAN partners, to de-escalate the crisis. And addressing the challenges in Myanmar has been one of the key themes of my discussions over the last few days here in Phnom Penh. The third topic that I mentioned that I would touch on is Australia's increased cooperation with ASEAN. Of course, we're ASEAN's first dialogue partner and our cooperation is broad and deep. But since the outset of the pandemic, Australia has really expanded its engagement with Southeast Asia and with ASEAN. As I mentioned before, with our first annual ASEAN-Australia Summit, an agreement to establish a comprehensive strategic partnership, we had a really big moment for ASEAN-Australia relations, and I think our relationship's stronger than ever. Our cooperation spans ASEAN's 3 pillars, and I'll just give a few examples. On the first pillar, the economic pillar, we've supported the development of some of ASEAN's most significant policies and strategies, including the Master Plan on ASEAN Connectivity 2025, the Strategy for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which was adopted by leaders last year, and the Initiative for ASEAN Integration, Work Plans 3 and 4, which has a particular focus on Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, narrowing the development gap in ASEAN. We've supported the development of those work plans and various projects under them, particularly in agriculture, where Australia draws on strong levels of expertise, and also development of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which are so important for driving development. We also support the capacity building and outreach functions of the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area, which I know is doing valuable work here in Cambodia. And I just discussed this with colleagues at the Ministry of Commerce to support Cambodia as you gear up for RCEP entry into force and for your ASEAN Chair Year economic priorities. On ASEAN's second pillar, socio-cultural, we've really ramped up cooperation on health issues in response to the pandemic. We've funded the ASEAN Centre for Public Health Emergencies and Emerging Diseases. We've established the ASEAN Australia Health Security Initiative, including 41 health fellowships to increase technical capacity and coordination, with an emphasis on supporting ASEAN's regional public health and health security agenda. We're also promoting safe and fair migration in ASEAN through the Triangle in ASEAN program. Through the work of that program has supported over 8,700 migrant workers since the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. Also, more than 7,500 migrant workers were reached through Migrant Resource Centre outreach activities and radio broadcasts, and some 6,500 returned migrant workers were supported at quarantine facilities since the beginning of the pandemic with food, personal protective equipment, sanitising materials and information. These returning migrant workers have been reached in collaboration with 4 provincial departments of labour and vocational training in Battambang, Kampot, Prey Veng and Kampong Cham. The Cambodian Labour Confederation, the Phnom Srei Organisation for Development, and an NGO partner called Legal Support for Children and Women. Then on ASEAN's third pillar, political security. ASEAN Act, our counter-trafficking program, is partnering to strengthen ASEAN criminal justice systems to provide just punishment of traffickers and protect the rights of victims. The COVID-19 crisis has only underscored the importance of ASEAN to Australia. Australia wants and needs a strong ASEAN playing these roles. To help achieve this, over the past year and a half, we've really increased our cooperation beyond the scope of our existing programs. To highlight just a handful of the initiatives, there is the $5 million contribution to the ASEAN Australia Health Security Partnership, a $1 million contribution to the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund, the contribution that I mentioned to the ASEAN Centre for Public Health Emergencies and Emerging Diseases, and a $1 million contribution to support implementation of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, as well as assistance with monitoring and evaluation for that framework. And an additional $4 million to the Triangle in ASEAN program to support safe and fair labour migration in ASEAN, particularly for those affected by COVID-19. And of course, in terms of vaccines, that really essential ingredient in the fight against this pandemic, including the highly infectious Omicron variant, I'm delighted that in late December, Cambodia took delivery of 2.35 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine provided by Australia. Now, I understand that those Pfizer vaccines will be used for booster shots, and I understand that that booster program is being rolled out in Cambodia today. So delighted that Australia has been able to contribute the Pfizer vaccines that are allowing those vital booster shots to be put into arms in Cambodia starting from today. We've been making similar deliveries of vaccines to other ASEAN member states in recent weeks, and we've now provided over 15 million doses to ASEAN members. This is part of our commitment to provide 60 million doses to Indo-Pacific countries by the end of this year. Australia recognises that our recovery from COVID-19 is tied to the recovery of our Southeast Asian neighbours. Nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. The vaccine delivery also builds on extensive cooperation between Australia and Cambodia on vaccination, including a $7 million delivery support agreement managed by UNICEF that includes education campaigns to combat vaccine hesitancy, assistance with cold chain storage, and training of health workers. This support also complements Australia's contribution to the COVAX facilities. I hope this all goes to demonstrate that Australia is a reliable, dependable, and capable partner for ASEAN. We're committed to supporting ASEAN's priorities and will be here to partner with our friends and neighbours throughout this crisis, as we've done in previous crises. The fourth topic that I'll be touching on is the ASEAN Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, the title of this lecture. So Australia is really honoured by ASEAN leaders' agreement to enter a comprehensive strategic partnership. For us, the CSP underscores Australia's commitment to ASEAN's central role in the Indo-Pacific. It builds on our near 50-year history of ASEAN-Australia cooperation, and it will really position the partnership for the future. It reflects the strength of our relationship and our ties as neighbours. And I really want to reiterate our gratitude to Cambodia and the government of Cambodia for its support for our comprehensive strategic partnership. This is, of course, about much more than a label. Our CSP will be about substance and will provide a framework for deeper cooperation. We look forward to working with our ASEAN friends on implementation, and particularly with Cambodia as ASEAN Chair, to ensure that implementation supports your priorities. We're supporting the CSP with new programs to address the complex emerging challenges of the future. These will build on our existing cooperation. So at the ASEAN-Australia Summit in October, Prime Minister Morrison announced the Australia for ASEAN package, which marks a new chapter in our relations. It has 3 elements. The first is a new Australia for ASEAN Futures initiative, which will provide $124 million to support projects that address complex challenges, including health security, terrorism, transnational crime, energy security, promoting the circular economy and healthy oceans, and support for implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Second, 100 Australia for ASEAN scholarships will support emerging ASEAN leaders to study in Australia in fields that advance the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific under its priority areas of cooperation. And this is really important for us, supporting the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific as ASEAN's document, ASEAN's outlook on the big challenges that are facing the region, and ASEAN's answer to deepening cooperation to address those challenges. And third, an Australia for ASEAN Digital Transformation and Future Skills initiative to support long-term economic recovery through 350 vocational education and training scholarships, as well as technical assistance partnerships between Australia and ASEAN training institutions and a new skills policy dialogue. These packages are our investment in the resilience, recovery, and security in the region, and are designed to give Southeast Asian countries options as they face the challenges of the times. This investment, this package, represents the largest ever increase in Australia's development cooperation program with ASEAN and builds on the landmark $500 million in funding for new economic development and security measures to support Southeast Asia's COVID-19 response and recovery announced at the 2020 ASEAN-Australia Summit. Finally, a little bit on openness and transparency. So transparency with our ASEAN friends always has and will continue to be of utmost importance. Australia will continue to support an open, inclusive and resilient region based on sovereignty and respect for international law. You mentioned in your introduction the Orcis Partnership, the new capability and technology sharing partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States, or AUKUS. Open and clear communication with our ASEAN neighbours on AUKUS is a real priority for Australia. So at the summit last year, our Prime Minister emphasised that AUKUS does not change Australia's commitment to ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN-led architecture. He assured all ASEAN members of our deep and abiding commitment to nuclear non-proliferation and our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as well as our obligations under the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. Australia has said that everything we do under AUKUS will support the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty. We've also been consulting closely on the activities of the Quad, our engagement with India, Japan and the United States. The Quad is not anti-anything. The Quad has a positive agenda for cooperation in the region, focused on concrete cooperation in areas like vaccines and climate change. All Quad members are committed to ASEAN centrality and to strengthening and complementing the ASEAN-led architecture. In all that we do, Australia is committed to continuing to foster a peaceful, secure region with ASEAN at its centre. We look forward to taking forward our positive agenda with ASEAN and its member states, and to working with ASEAN to advance peace and prosperity in our region. As we look ahead to this year, 2022, the challenges are really significant. Cambodia's theme for its chair year, Addressing Challenges Together, recognises this. But as it faces these challenges, ASEAN and Cambodia as ASEAN Chair can continue to count on very strong support from Australia. We often say that Australia will be with ASEAN every step of the way. And that's what I see happening as we take forward the ASEAN-Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. We'll continue to bring a distinctly Australian approach to our engagement, supporting ASEAN centrality, bringing commitment, capability and reliability, and backing ASEAN priorities. While I'm here in Phnom Penh and later when I'm back in Jakarta, I'll be listening very carefully to help ensure that Australia does just that. I'll finish there. I really thank you again for the opportunity to be here to make these comments. I welcome any questions you have, or in accordance with my commitment to listen, to hear any comments that you may wish to share. Thank you again.